As I said, welcome to everybody. This webinar is always an opportunity for you really to share with each other and talk about what's going on in your district, get feedback and advice from your peers around the state, an opportunity for MASB to hear what's going on and how we might be able to help you out. And we've got a number of MASB staff on today to shed light. So particularly, I know topics that are always of interest to you are what's happening at the Capitol and what's happening in the legal arena. So we have Jen Smith on, available for comments and conversation on the Capitol stuff, and Dan Feinberg, our Assistant Legal Counsel and Labor Relations Assistant Directors, on to talk about any issues that are there. I'll probably give them both an opportunity to make comments on things that they choose. Just kind of, I'll give you just a kind of what's happening at MASB sort of thing. As you can imagine, we've seen from registrations, like we are gearing up for our annual leadership conference that's now just under 2 months away, and registration looks good. But if you haven't registered, I think early bird registration actually ends this week, if I remember correctly. So you get a little lower price if you get registered by the end of the week. We are in Lansing this year, actually in this year and next year because of COVID, frankly, how nice the Lansing Center was to us. And at the time when we weren't sure like how things were going, they were immediately willing to let us out of our contract. In the end, they would have been forced to, but they didn't have to get to that point. And so we scheduled them in this year to try to get them back on the books as quickly as possible. And then our normal schedule had them in for 2024. So we'll have 2 years in a row, and then we'll go into the alternating between Traverse City and Lansing. I will say positively that we're seeing some new restaurants in the downtown Lansing area. So that's helpful for those of you that'll be downtown and looking for places to eat. Sometimes weeknight evenings can be difficult, but the weekends are pretty solid. So that will be a positive. And we've got a good lineup of speakers and clinic sessions lined up. So looking forward to conference. Just did a webinar, or not a webinar, just did recorded a podcast that'll come out. I'm not even sure when that one's coming out, Chrissy. You probably can tell me that, but it's in the next month anyways.
It's actually this week's episode, so it'll come out on Saturday.
Episode. All right. And so I actually did an interview with Kevin Stotts, who's the president of, used to be Talent 2025. It's now Talent First over in West Michigan. They're a business group that has been around for about 12 years, really trying to focus on education and workforce issues. And one of the things that they're watching, they were doing it before COVID, and worked with the schools in West Michigan with the Reading Now Network on literacy. And now with COVID and coming out of COVID, the kind of prioritization of other things that happen at your districts, literacy has taken a bit of a back seat. And of course, our MEEP numbers are showing that. And so had a really good conversation with Kevin about their efforts, kind of just to lift up the issue, but not only to the school community to say, hey, you're sliding, you're not doing well, but really to lift it up through like a dashboard that they've created, to lift it up to parents, to get parents to focus on the importance, and maybe even to back up school districts to like tell parents, like focus on the things that matter in the long term to your kids, not the cultural wars that are happening. They have a history of being willing to step out on behalf of public schools and back us up when we need to. And so it's a really good conversation. I hope that if you're one of the podcast listeners that you tune into it. I think it's a good conversation about literacy and the problems that our districts are facing. And clearly there's a need. If we can't get kids reading in elementary school, like their chance for success down the road is very, very difficult. So that was a good conversation from a podcast perspective. We have some others lined up throughout the fall. So that will be good. We have a MASB board meeting at the end of this week. And so we're going to finalize some work that we did in a board retreat with our strategic plan and new goals and priorities internally in the upcoming year to try to keep moving things forward for all of you and giving you opportunities for additional learning and for what service models that we can bring to you to help you out. So got a number of things going on. MASA's conference is this week up in Traverse City. And so we have some staff leaving for that shortly. We do a lot of work with superintendents and learn a lot from them at the conference from what's happening. And it's where we typically sign up a lot of people to do strategic planning and workshops and other things as we engage with superintendents. So that's also happening. A lot of people on the road this week with that. I want to throw it out to you guys. And I mean, we're in the new school year. I'd be interested in hearing, I mentioned kind of the culture wars stuff that we've seen as districts, particularly through last year. Are you noticing a difference this fall? Is it settling down in your district? Did you do something to help it settle down so that others can learn from you? Like, how was the start of the school year been for our local district members out there? Positive? Lots of friction? What do things look like? I know somebody wants to talk.
I think Jan is looking for her mute button.
I am. I was going to say, we're having a really good beginning of the school year, but we didn't have any of the culture wars, those sorts of things. The biggest problem for us, and just today, our superintendent sent a note to parents, is finding qualified people to teach. Ours right now is middle school science. And so we do not have a certified teacher in that role, but we just have to let the parents know and hope that we can fill it. Took a year and a half for music. We finally found someone, but so I guess that's the most difficult for us here in my part of the Upper Peninsula. So.
Yeah, the teaching shortage is big. And I think even the suburban districts that are on here, and maybe it's not quite as bad as what you're experiencing, Jan, but maybe before they had 30 applicants and now they've got 5 applicants, so they can fill the position, but who they're choosing from is not necessarily the same skill set they were choosing from before.
It's been a really smooth start to the school board for us at to the school year for us at Montessori. Also, the biggest challenge we've had is an increase over already high numbers of people trying to fake in-district addresses to enroll their students. That's a problem that not a lot of districts have. We are larger than we anticipated by about 95 students, which will help our budget, but does stuff our schools a little fuller than we like. And we've had some very creative attempts to get people enrolled as resident students when they don't actually live in the district. That puts a burden on our administrative team to chase all those down and respond to complaints about why we're not enrolling their kid and all that kind of stuff. But otherwise, very smooth start for us.
That's an interesting problem, but I'm going to ask a question of the group and I'd be interested in feedback. I had a reporter that emailed me this morning and I'm going to do a call with later today. They were actually keying in on a New York Times article from the beginning of last week on a study out of Stanford that looked at last year's data across the country on chronic absenteeism and truancy. And Michigan was the 3rd highest state in the country for the number of kids that would show as chronically absent, meaning more than 10 days in a term or in the year. I can't remember what it was, absent. And it was substantial for ours. And our growth from pre-pandemic to now was actually the highest of any state in the country. There were some that had a total number higher than us, but we had the biggest growth in that chronic absenteeism. That came up I did off the record a couple weeks ago, and that same question came up. And we know that we lost a lot of kids during COVID. They just kind of disappeared. They're not in public school. They're not in private school. We know that we have more behavior issues within our schools, which, depending on what happens as far as consequences of that, could actually create more absenteeism type issues. What I would be interested in what you're seeing in your districts in this chronic absenteeism space. And the other thing would be not only what are you seeing, are you doing things to try to keep kids in your buildings? Are programs that you're doing working? Because clearly it is a problem in many states, and Michigan's, sadly, it's not the one you want to be leading the way in, but we have a lot of kids not being educated in Michigan. Any schools on today that are seeing that?
Hello?
Susan?
Oh, yes, thank you. So I guess I'm more talking. So I would love to see like reasons behind that, or if they could find some correlation with race and disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. My own child, who came out as transgender this past year, had a lot of being absent from bullying and so mental illness and stuff. So yeah, I would love to know about that link, and I think that's important for our state and our districts to think about.
Yeah, the good point, Susan. And I see Shannon just posted the article in the study that came out. One of the things that they are seeing some correlation were states that either, and they weren't impugning states that made this choice, but if you were out of school longer because of COVID, those states tend to be leading the way in kids having chronic absenteeism. And they don't have an answer. They kind of chalked it up and just said they got used to not going to school. And so that is a part of it. They did show some that definitely there is some correlation to poverty, which probably isn't surprising in that regard. But they only have 1 year data, so they're collecting the second year right now. So they don't have good correlation to be able to say this is long-term, here's what it's looking like. They've seen a few states in this year that numbers haven't changed a lot. And so they're feeling that the absenteeism numbers are staying higher. And there was one comment, and it wasn't from the researchers. It was an interview with another individual. And they were talking kind of about, what you just touched on, Susan, was parents, because of, I think, a greater awareness during COVID about student mental health and anxiety and things along those lines, that there is this part where parents are holding their kids out more regularly with anxiety type issues. And there wasn't much in this article about that. It was kind of a slight mention of it, but they also did mention if that's happening regularly, there are, of course, consequences to anxiety, because, and I think about this when my daughter was coming back into school when COVID kind of ended, and I talked to her therapist, and it was like, our therapist is like, you should really try to get her back in face to face, because the longer that she stays out, the harder it will be for her to ever return back to the normal classroom. And so that is mentioned. So they don't have the answers, but it was an interesting article. And so that's why I bring it up, just because, interested if you're seeing it. Clearly districts in Michigan are doing it. So I see we've got Kurt posting a question. Schools of choice students to utilize district transportation, designated locations, pickup. That's a good question. If people have some advice in answering, I'd like, what if you have schools of choice? Do you in any way provide transportation into the district for those schools of choice kids, or is it all up to them to get there?
Yeah, Don, I'm interested in best practices because we got a little bit of inconsistency in our district right now. I'm trying to understand what people are doing in the rest of the state. Thank you.
I don't see anybody jumping up to answer that right now. I will tell you, Kurt, and you can answer via the chat, so you can answer that way. What Stan just said is, I would say the most typical model in Michigan is most districts do not provide any transportation to schools of choice. Now, I will tell you, I have heard of some districts, you know, where like they're running a bus into the neighboring district and there's a common pickup spot, and of course, that can ruin relationships between districts, but I do know that it happens. And then I also know of some where they, at least as a school, will let schools of choice families know like what bus stops are like the farthest out, like near their side of the district or whatever. And they'll say, you can drop your kids off at that stop and we will pick them up. But I don't know of very many that have a very specific plan where they are going into the district to do that. Mary, I see you have your hand up.
I do. Thanks, Don. I know that in Oxford, we do have a couple of stops out of district. One is just north of us in Dryden, and the other one is just south of us in Pontiac, where we do have a central location where our buses do go. Now, I don't know how or why that began, but I'd be happy to ask and share that with you.
Appreciate that, Mary.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I'm in Jackson Northwest District, and we have a common pickup spot at a Sears that is in our district, but well, it's not even a Sears anymore. But anyway, there's a common pickup spot that's in our district that is utilized for school of choice students if they can get them there. It's on the city bus line as well. So we don't necessarily go out of district, but we do bus some school of choice students in.
All right, thanks for that, Nick. That was a great question, Kurt. That's exactly what we want to have these for, is to have that kind of those kind of questions and have people be able to give you some idea of what they're doing. It's, I think, always helpful in this space. Anybody, Stan, are you hand up again?
I am, but I think Kimberly Willis was in ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kimberly.
That's fine. Thank you. I was just going to add that in Homer, we're a very small rural district, and we actually have district lines that go into other counties. So we have quite a bit of school choice kiddos, and we do a central location pickup for our largest population of school choice. And then we work kind of with the families on a bus location as well to do some pickup of our school choice kids. Not everybody gets transportation based on where they live, of course, but we do what we can to try to support those families so those kids can remain in district with us.
Thanks, Kimberly. Stan?
I was going to change the topic, so if people want to keep talking about this, skip me for now.
I will give a final, Kurt, you asked about kind of consistency, and I think that is, in the law, there is no requirement for consistency, right? You don't have to provide it. You can provide it. As you heard from other people, where it works, because there's a pickup spot maybe in your district that's an easy drop-off point, at least for, say, group X of kids. It might not be very good for kids coming in from a neighboring district. Like, I think it is very difficult to get to consistency for every choice parent, because they could be coming from 2 districts away because somebody's working there, like there's all kinds of reasons. So I think it's good that you're thinking about it, but it's also, you shouldn't hold your district or you yourself to a place where every schools of choice kid gets treated the same way, because I don't think you could ever get to that place. That would be too difficult for a district to manage, particularly with the shortage of bus drivers that many of you are also facing. Stan, go ahead.
I'd be curious to know from board members in other districts, who in your district has the authority to issue long-term suspensions and expulsions? Does the board get involved in those at all? Is it your superintendent? Love to know what that's about.
Who wants?
Stan, I'll comment.
Why you make
Go for it, Ken.
Okay, Stan, I'll comment in Hudsonville that we leave that with the superintendent, but appeals can be made to the board for reconsideration. We've had it that way for a number of years, and that's worked well for us. So.
And do you have any sense of what percentage of superintendent's decisions get appealed to the board?
Oh, less than 5%.
Interesting.
A very, very few.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna go by just where they are on my screen. So I might be out of order, but it's the way I'm seeing them. So Mark Katz.
Yeah, when I was on the local board in Berkeley, we did see that responsibility to the superintendent, and appeals then would come to the board. And at that time, we had no appeals that ever came to the board from the superintendent's decision. Now, I've been off that local board for a few years now, so they may have changed it, but that's how we were handling it back when I was on the local board.
All right, thanks. Nick?
Yeah, Stan, we just transitioned to a new superintendent a year ago in July. And our policy was anything over 10 days had to come to the board. And it's always been one of those questions that I had joining in 2016. You know, this sounds like it should be more of an administrative thing. So we've recently moved to change that number to a higher number. Anyone that's going to have a suspension more than 10 days would come to the board. That's not the case anymore, and I think we're transitioning more towards a 50 number or a 25 number. But that is something that we just went through here, and we have a really new board, so it's perfect timing to get that change with the new superintendent and a new board voice.
Yep. And we
so that's what we do here.
Thanks. I saw your hand up briefly. I don't know if you had.
I didn't have anything to add. I just put it in the comments because we were similar. So it's our admin team and appeals only through the board. So I just put it in the comments versus because everyone was kind of coming along the same line. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate everybody's feedback on that.
I would also suggest that prior to the restorative practices, we were probably expelling District 8,000, about high school between 2,800 and 2,900. We were probably expelling 12, 13 on a high year and 7 or 8. And since restorative practices, it's actually gone really well. I was a skeptic, so I'll give the Lansing credit. It's actually working for us. So I would say that those things, even for over 10 days last year, we were only up to like 5 of those conversations, which I find pretty amazing for a school district that size. And we expect it to go, even lower. So I would say restorative practices have lowered our number down, not the number of instances and touch points for the administration, but in terms of those frequent flyers and higher numbers of days that they would be asked to stay away, those have come down.
Yeah, those are fantastic numbers. We saw very nice decreases after implementing PBIS in our district. And we've also implemented restorative practices in our schools, and that has helped. So for us, it's not a volume question as much as a timing question. Because, for instance, we have one coming up tomorrow morning, a discipline hearing that we just found out we need to have on Monday evening, but we have to have it by Wednesday or we miss a deadline. That puts a burden on our administrators. Obviously, asking our superintendent to handle these would put a burden on him as well. So our policy committee is going to be taking a look at this, and I kind of like the idea of the superintendent handling them at least up to a certain number of days, and then an appeal process to the board. And I'm really intrigued to hear from more than one of you that when you had an appeal process, very little got appealed. That's surprising to me, but good to hear. So thank you again.
Stan, our superintendent actually recommended that we go in that direction. He preferred that direction. And partly because same thing, PBIS, restorative practices, he wanted the flexibility to manage the situation and that worked best for him and the child and so forth. And so we've been, and yes, it's a little more work for him, but it's more efficient, more effective, I should say, for him as well as the kids. We're very confident in that. Yeah.
Good, thanks.
Teresa.
Yeah, so I raised my hand to switch subjects. So if you guys want to keep talking about this, I have something to add from the question you asked first. So do I clear the decks on this one first?
Well, let's see if anybody else has any. People can always come back or they can answer in the chat. So we'll let you go, Teresa. So you asked how the school year, that was a question, and I want to answer because I'm with my peers. First of all, the school year is going well. I mean, everyone has started up and that's been nice and everything. However, because I asked this, I think in the last one I attended probably 2 months ago in the lunch, and I just wanted to advise today because some of you might be in the same area we are. We have a upcoming issue that's come from our community and a public complaint for some books. And I have a feeling it's going to get into the local, and we already have things policy and we've been following policy and we're doing everything along those guidelines. However, my suspicion is that we're coming up to our hearing, our private committee hearing, and it's going to be in the local news. And it's a Moms for Liberty type of thing. And I'd asked earlier in the summer if other, after COVID, that was pretty prevalent in COVID. And I think one other district down in Jackson shared that they had still had some hanger-ons. Well, we still do. and we're diligently working as a district and everything, doing what our policies we're a governing board. So we're working alongside that. So I just wanted to share that, yes, because I would feel like I was on this with all my peers and in Northview Public, the district, and then you see something and I didn't share it. So I don't want that to diminish. And the reason I'm sharing it is we've had a great start, high enrollment, similar to Stan, than we expected, and people coming back and wanting to be within our school district. So I just felt I was also curious if anyone else is experiencing those types of issues from any of the groups, either from the COVID hangover or just anything like that. So thank you for giving me time to share, and we're in a good position and very positive in our district. Thanks for that, Teresa. I know from and others can share, as we of course interact with lots of districts. You're not alone particularly still in the controversy surrounding books, and we're still, having some conversations in individual districts surrounding members of the LGBT community and how they handle that. Probably the newest one that we've seen in a few districts is health centers, where they have become political issues, whether they are on existing ones or the concept of new ones. They're getting pulled into the culture war space as well. And, I think there is, and I was just with a superintendent last week, that last year had a very high profile book issue, lots of parents for weeks on end. And, they looked at their policies, they made changes that met the needs of the school and the needs of the community as much as they could. And he said now it's, the person that kind of started it still shows up at board meetings, but all of the other people feel the district has done a good job of addressing it, and that there's a process in place to, doesn't solve it for everybody, but at least makes, so he was, pleased that their work with the board got to them to a good place, and then things so far this year have settled down, but these are still
happening.
They're still happening. And
Sure.
I think some, they want to keep it out there, right? I think there's some that's it's an issue, and it's
Right.
parents that are bringing up in their minds
Sure.
legitimately. For others, I think that there are concerted efforts to continue to stir the pot.
Right. In our case, it's not even a parent complaint, it's a group, right? But where I would say this is and I want to be clear for our district, it's in our Reader's Choice, like classroom library. So I don't want to tell you, it's not like, so those are the types of things. And I won't go into anything more than that, but thank you for sharing. And last time didn't seem to be anyone, but not that I want to be reassured, but there are things like this, and they're going to continue as everyone tries to bring in the cultural issues into our public school education system, right? So thank you for sharing, and thank you all.
Hey, Don, can you expand on the health center comment you made?
Yeah, so we've had, I can think of 2 districts, and they're actually both are on your side of the state, Ken. Last year, Grant Public Schools had an existing health center. And how it got caught up was they had a student contest on designing a mural for the school. A student won that contest based on a drawn, like 8.5 by 11 kind of artist rendering, and then painted the mural. And members of the community objected to some of the depictions in the mural, that there were symbols in it, and there were LGBTQ possible flags, colors, that sort of thing. The school board, even though the health center had been there for a long time, I think pretty quickly reacted and pushed back and decided they were going to close the health center at the end of last school year. Because the health center was running the contest, even though it was through the school. Like, it was just, and the lack of communication on some other issues. The number of families that it served in that community was pretty high. So over the summer, there was a lot of pushback on the closure. Their contract was coming up. The board decided to engage in further conversations, and they just announced a couple of weeks ago that they will keep it open. They made some changes in the contract related to communication. They did require the mural to be painted over, but it was, so they decided to keep it open, but it was very reactive in nature. There is a new one proposed. It wasn't Big Rapids, but it's up in that area. And some people are very supportive of it. The superintendent and school board are supportive of it. There are members of the community that are questioning its existence, and why would we be using resources for kind of health centers and things along those lines. So it's not an education function. People are bringing up, more sick people in our schools. And there are now, I think, about 200 health centers either tied to schools or in schools around the state right now. So it's pretty prevalent. And to the question that I raised earlier about chronic absenteeism and truancy, one of the things that article does talk about, that if you're doing social emotional well-being activities in your school, if you're having a health center, those are things actually that are proven practices to reduce absenteeism and truancy, because they can come in. So I think there's a push-pull on that. But those 2 districts, and it seems like I've read about a third recently as well, that, I think what I gathered in this most recent one is there just conversations out there that there's a belief that in these health centers, sometimes they are their sex education practices or sex information practices are not what they're supposed to be, but of course they're governed by state law, just like the school. Like, it's seemingly some misinformation that's out there, I think, for some people that are pushing back against it, but.
Okay,
Shannon.
thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's actually a great topic, Don, because we are actually in the process of establishing a health center in our district. And I would love to know if anybody on this call or anywhere has policies that tie in. You know, you mentioned some of these problems about communication or some other things that maybe we need to include as we adopt policies surrounding this health center. What else do we need to think about having in those policies to make sure that's a smooth relationship?
Do we have districts on here that have health centers in place that might be able to give Shannon a little bit of guidance on what has worked and what do you think about them? What does your community think about them? Impacts that it's had, policies that you have?
This is Rob Skydam. I'm actually from the Grant Public School District, and so I wanted to join in. It was interesting hearing, you know, this conversation. I had not really intended to actively participate, more listening and hearing what others are. And obviously there are things that I can't really go into too many of the details, but one of the observations I had was that getting as much transparency you know, on record, you know, about the process. One of the big things was parent consent, and there's a lot of misinformation about what the health center can and can't do that was already established in place, but it wasn't necessarily being shared in an effective way with the community. And as we've, you know, talked about in this meeting so far, that one person or a small group of people can really start to spread misinformation quite quickly, and then it's really hard to take it back or take control back of that narrative. So having the transparency conversations ahead of time before really the practice kind of gets started is really important. I think hosting community forums where they can ask questions to the health center and get firsthand information would be very valuable. And then some of the things in the contract that were reworked were just more of, I would say, mutually beneficial policies put in place that protected both the district and the health center. Some of the concerns I had originally were with some of the language that was, in my personal opinion, some overreach on the position of the board versus, you know, our partner. And so I think just having that dialogue ahead of time is really, really important, because it's really challenging to do after the fact. So I don't know if that answers your question or helps, but that's one of the big observations that I've had in this whole fiasco.
Rob, thanks a lot for speaking up and sharing some of your experience and how that can help others.
Yep, my pleasure.
Others that have had health centers that might want to share, or even if things you've heard from neighboring districts that might have them.
Hi, Don. This is Shirley Tolliver. How are you?
Hi, Shirley.
We have a health center, and you know what? We get a lot of help from St. Mary's. So we're also when we passed our by, we're also building an innovation center, and we're gonna put a larger health center in there. Now we have it at our middle school, and but it really helps, and the parents are really glad that we have it. Now, who was that needed the information? Because if she gives me her email, I can get some more information for her.
Shannon, if you're willing, Shannon just posted it in chat, Shirley, so you can.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
And actually, Jen, you might I know because we've engaged over the years on this health center discussion. What's the name of the statewide organization that does a lot of work on the health centers and the school aid budget?
I was not prepared for that question. I will have to look it up. I want to say that a part of it mirrors with MDHHS, but let me look it up. I'll find it in a
It
second.
is. It's the former board member from Eaton Rapids, I think, and then I think Amy Zagman did work with them, and
Yeah, I know the acronym. Let me find it and I'll put it in the.
Okay. Kurt, that's a really interesting question that you posted, and I know you said you didn't want it as a topic here, but the Civil Discourse Seminar at Grand Valley State University, they have a Civil Discourse Center at Grand Valley. I think it's got two names to it. I think Padnos is one, and then there's another one, I think, if I remember correctly. This is probably getting out in front of things that we're doing, but I mentioned our board retreat this summer. So they're doing a symposium. It's close to our conference time. And they have a chair that changes every year or 2 years. The focus has always been civil discourse. This year, it's very specific to K-12. And so we actually were going to share when we get more information with our membership that if people are able to attend, hopefully you won't choose that over our conference. They're not on competing days or anything, but I know they're really close. We're going to encourage people to attend. We are actually in conversations. We've already reached kind of tentative agreement to actually partner with the Grand Valley Civil Discourse Center. We won't launch anything until we might do some pilots after the first of the year, but we actually want to partner with them because they actually go out into the field and do civil discourse workshops at nonprofits, at school districts, at cities. They'll go anywhere, but they don't have much capacity to do so. They don't have a lot of people on their team. And of course, we have a lot of adjunct staff members that go out and work with districts. So we're hoping probably a year from now to be able to fully launch some civil discourse workshops for school districts to bring us in to be able to do work and training with boards and or administrative teams on civil discourse, and even take the second step to have community conversations on civil discourse because we think it's such a troubling area right now and bogs down school districts, because sometimes we just talked about it in the health center. Sometimes it's misinformation, disinformation. Like, how do we bring people together and not try to reach agreement? We're not bringing an issue forward to reach agreement. It's about how do you talk to each other in a respectful and civil way and listen and show curiosity, and how do you do that? So we're very supportive of what they're doing at Grand Valley. We are the board adopted as one of the priorities for the upcoming year to create this partnership with them and actually deliver in a year from now, actually create workshops that we can bring out to school districts to help you with both internally and on your board and with your community members on civil discourse, because it's an area that everybody needs help. I could probably sit at my Thanksgiving dinner and have somebody facilitate some family member conversations around civil discourse. So good question, Stan. I will check on that. It's something that I really, I do think will be a valuable project, or seminar that they're offering. So we do sometimes do credit for outside events. So
Don, one thing I think about as well is civil discourse in the area of social media, because we can have and kind of back to your initial question, the number of people showing up at our board meetings to talk about anything from books to whatever has dropped, but I think the social media environment is just as hot as ever. And that I think that's where, at least my perception is, that's where much of the discourse, be it civil or not, where much of the discourse is happening now. So I'm curious in that Grand Valley seminar. Thanks for sharing that, and I'll go on their site and see if they're talking social media as well, and how we effectively maneuver through that.
Well, I will also pass it along. We're working directly with the chair that is putting that day together, or that event. It's an evening event, that evening together. And if they don't have it completely locked down, I'll mention that the social media space may be a worthwhile place to kind of look at. And Kim, you posted the civility project. Is that's either like there's two different things that I'm thinking of. I know Oakland University has also done some work on civility. I don't know if that's the one. But then also I know that the two editors from the Free Press, Stephen Henderson, and from the News,
Nolan Finley.
And is that, Kim, is that the civility project when you mentioned that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually was able to sit through the Oakland County CASBA group had the civility project. They had Henderson and Finley in June for their county school board members. And it's not like the Grand Valley one where it's like a facilitated type. This was just two people that are very different, but that have been, in essence, lifelong colleagues and friends, having a conversation about like how they come to understand each other, but not agree with each other necessarily. And I thought they did a wonderful job in that setting. And I know that they're traveling around the state where they have opportunities to share. So for those that are interested, I would say look at the civility project if you're looking for something maybe to just come in your community and have somebody talk about how they interact, how they get along, how important they believe it is for people that think differently to talk together. And that is something that they really pushed in that conversation that we had there. And I'm just, because we're on this topic, I was going to give you all one to look at if I can find it. There's a book out there called I Never Thought of It That Way, by a former reporter by the name of Monica Guzman. And it's a short, I did it as an audiobook, so it was actually a relatively short audiobook. She actually spent some time she's not from Michigan, but she was a reporter for the Midland paper for a short period of time as she was moving around the country in her travels. And her book is, she's now a part of, I believe it's called Braver Angels. I could say that wrong because I know I've done it wrong before, but it is the largest bipartisan, because they actually want to point out that you can have a political view and still have civil discourse, but the largest bipartisan organization in the country focused on civil discourse and working, trying to understand and show curiosity. And the book was really good. And she is kind of like what I said about Thanksgiving Day. She talks a lot about her family, and then very specifically about a project they ran. They demographically found two politically opposed districts, one in Seattle, Washington, and another one in rural Oregon, and brought these two groups of people together. They drove down to Oregon and spent some time together. And some of those people, like polar opposites of each other, after the fact, have become friends through that work. And so it's a really interesting book on how to try to go about showing curiosity and not jumping to conclusions. She does spend some time, Ken, talking. They talk about when to engage and when not to engage. And part of it is about social media. Like, is that like the right time to engage with somebody on social media versus other ways? And there's like 4 metrics that they say to measure before you decide to engage in a conversation with somebody when you think you're going to get somewhere. So it's actually a really interesting topic. Other things that are ongoing. Jen did post the School Community Health Alliance of Michigan. Shannon, that's the group that has done a lot of work on school health centers in Michigan for years, and might be worth checking out. And I'm actually trying to think, although I think the current superintendent at Oak Ridge in Muskegon County, Tom Livesey, he's been on the board of SHAMI for quite some time, and they have a health center. He may be a good person to reach out to. I'm sure he would be willing to talk about what they've experienced. He's been at it for years. Mary.
Thanks. I wanted to share on a new topic if we're all set with this.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So I just we're talking about how the school year is going, and in general, things are going pretty well. In Oxford, we've launched our parent university this year, which is opportunities for our parents for education seminars. Some are online, some are in person, helping them understand different things. Like this month, we're doing a suicide prevention training. We're doing a seminar on cyber safety, on bullying. What is bullying? We're going on to things like understanding threat assessment. We have so many people who read things on social media and are concerned that the sky is falling. Quite often because they don't have all of the information and they don't even know where to look. So launching Parent University is giving us an opportunity to better educate our community and our families. We're offering Love and Logic. That's going to be for the birth through kindergarten. That's for the younger ones. So we're giving folks opportunities at no cost to participate with some of these programs. And so that's really great. Some of the challenges that we're finding is that our community is still very hypersensitive to anything that happens, and then whatever happens at school is out on social media before the district has an opportunity to even review things and send out emails. And we have a group of parents who are questioning everything. Why is this kid back in school if he said this to this other student? And why is he back in school? And how come he's not, give us more information? A lot of things that we are not able to do, but people are getting really riled up. So we're continuing to send out emails and whatnot, but it's presenting a challenge for us too, as we're trying to we're following our threat assessment protocols, and, we also have to follow the law, and we're not giving out student names and we're not giving out specifics. So that's been a bit of a challenge, as well as people in our community, things happening in our community. We had a bomb scare at our local movie theater. And it was an Oxford student. So people are calling for, well, if it was an Oxford student, how come he can show up in school today? And, it's hard to explain this whole, the whole process to people. So we are working on those pieces, also helping train our community in, talking about what it is we do and how we do things. And it's homecoming this weekend. Yay.
Thanks for that, Mary. And I will say, if you feel during the course of this year that your parent university is going well, it could be a great clinic session topic next year at ALC to share what's going on with that. I think it gets to a lot of the issues that people have talked about today about, whether it be a health center or other things, getting parents to understand from you what's going on has some real benefits. So thank you for that. Jen, anything that, I know the legislature isn't running real fast right now, but things that they need to know about from a legislative perspective?
Not really. Most of the legislators' focus right now is on energy, and that's sucking most of the oxygen out of the room, which is fine. We had plenty of attention this spring. We are working on potential changes to the evaluation law. And then just some other smaller bills that today it was panic alarms in every building and it would be funded by the state. That got a hearing in House Education. Judging by the hearing, I'm not sure how far the bill goes because most people thought that was already covered by the budget. The question about retention bonuses. So there's always a question about how retention bonuses are given out. So that is a better question for your business officials. Because there's been questions in the past about that money having to take retirement out of it or not having to take retirement out of it, how it counted and all of that. So I'm not sure we had retention bonuses in the State Aid Act, to be honest. I think those were taken out. And the only bonus money that was put in there was if you paid your teachers a minimum amount, then you could receive a grant from that. But there was retention bonus information in a State Aid Act in the past, but it gets messy when it gets to how you give it out. So I would talk to your business officials about it. I'm sorry, I can't be more clear, but it definitely got tangled in good idea, but not a lot of details on the execution. And so it all got wrapped up in trying to figure out how to actually do it. But really the biggest thing we're watching right now is evals. If you have not talked to your state rep about passing 4671, which would allow school to start with before Labor Day without having to fill out all the waivers, please do so. We need to get some of those people back on our side. We had the votes, lost them in caucus, and so we're trying to get those back. And to understand that this doesn't mean you have to start school before Labor Day. It is simply an option. And right now you have to fill out the waiver form every so many years to be able to have that option. This would remove that paperwork and just let you decide when to start. So if you don't want to start till after Labor Day because that's better for your community, that's great. If you want to start before Labor Day, you don't have to ask the state for permission if we can get this bill moving. So if you haven't made those phone calls, please do. And let me know if you have any issues with that. But we are trying to it came out of House Committee unanimous. And then the Republicans on the committee changed their vote. So we're trying to bring them back so that we can get this moving. Jan, you have your hand up?
No, I've just been sitting here in anticipation. Our elementary school, we could announce this at 12 noon Central Time, which it is, that we're a red ribbon school. And we're just so thrilled because that's a national honor. Our MSTEP scores went way up. Total opposite of the rest of the world. I don't know. But anyways, so I'm announcing it to this group first.
Congratulations, Jan.
Thanks.
Jen, Kurt had posted earlier a question about evaluation, in fact, about the legislation and administrator evaluation and teacher evaluation and the 40%. And Jen or Dan, like, in my thought right now, as long as the law is what it is, and I know a lot of people do evaluations for administrators in the fall of the year for superintendents, you have to follow what the current law advantage is until such time that, in fact, the law is changed, if it is in fact changed. And we have, as an association, I think, Jen, been advocating to go down to a 25%, if I remember correctly, away from the 40%.
That's what we had been advocating in the past. The bill that's out there now just gets rid of the MSTEP as a growth model and does not have any growth tied to that. So the only growth that would be involved in your evaluations would be what you determine at the local level on the tool that you determine. I don't know if that's how it's going to stay as we go forward. I think there's going to be some push to put some level of growth requirement back in. It will not be tied to the MSTEP. But until such time as we're like, hey, it's Public Act, whatever number, everything stays the same. You still have 40%. You still have all the current law still applies. The earliest this is going to take effect would be probably be next school year. I think it's a bigger lift than the legislature thinks it is. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the bill that was introduced. And we haven't even started hearings on it. And the legislature is talking about leaving on November 9th. So I don't think this is something we do this year. I think it'll be next year, but do not hold up your evaluations knowing this might be coming. Because we have no idea when it would go into effect. And so you need to just go forward with your evaluations as you would, and we will keep you posted as this bill moves. We do expect a hearing maybe next week or the week after, but there's still a lot of work that has to be done, and we haven't seen any of the cleanup stuff that we've asked for yet. I'm meeting with the MEA later today on another piece of it. So there's a lot going on, and I don't think it'll get done this year.
Thanks for that, Jen.
There's a question about dental exams. Senate Bill 280 would require dental exams for all students enrolling in school for the first time. You would have to have them done within 6 months of enrollment or first day of school. This would go into effect for the next school year. And we had argued that there is a program out there that they should just expand that allows for dental exams. It's like a mobile dental unit that goes around to different districts. This has been a pilot program, so many of you may not know about it. But they're looking to expand that program. But then with the expansion, they're expanding this mandatory oral exam before school starts. And then if you don't have one, if they don't have one on file, they either have to file a waiver or an intent to get the examination. And it's a little murky, but it appears the school has to tell the parent that they are delinquent in this. And give them the resources to get the exam. However, you cannot not allow someone to enroll. The kid gets to enroll whether the parents have taken care of this or not. You just have to stay on the parent to get it done. It's supposed to be handled similar to hearing and vision. We have been completely unsuccessful in slowing this down at all. It is on the House floor, I believe. I think this will be done before we're done with the year. The funding runs through the program. Oh my goodness, it has a name. But it runs through the dental program for kids. That's where the funding runs through to get these, to get access in areas where there isn't access, or to get access to people who may not have dental insurance. That's where all the funding is focused.
Thanks for that, Jen. I know we are actually 5 minutes past our normal end time. Dan, I was gonna have you touch base on the possibility of kind of any questions out there on like labor and the changes that were made in the legislature, but we can have Dan back on and on future webinars to bring that conversation up. I appreciated everybody bringing up topics that were out there today. Really appreciate having you share with each other. That was great today. And we will call this a wrap, and I look forward to seeing all of you in a couple of months at ALC, or if you're not there, I'll see you the next time that we have Member Matters webinar. Have a great week.